Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition being the 800-pound gorilla king of the tabletop role-playing game industry. Dungeon Craft did an amazing video linked below, and this is me commenting on his commentary on why Dungeons & Dragons is so far ahead of the rest of the industry, because it really is very interesting right now, right? Because I think a lot of people are like, oh, D&D, it's just the first. It's not the best. It's going to fall behind. And it very much looks like D&D is not falling behind any tabletop role-playing game and is distancing it and is continuing to distance itself in superiority and separation. Just like how far ahead it is from literally the entire industry. It really doesn't even have a single competitor. It competes against the entire industry at the same time. So what I want to talk about is Professor Dungeon Master listed 6 different reasons, right? I think there are 7. So I'm looking at these 7 stanchions of separation for Dungeons and Dragons. And today we're going to talk more about the rules, which is a stanchion of separation for Dungeons and Dragons. Its rules make it superior and separate from every other tabletop role-playing game that exists. Now, I have 3 years of high school Spanish, que pasa? So I am going to use my 3 years of high school Spanish as a mnemonic. Casa. Casa means house. C-A-S-A. Let's talk about Dungeons & Dragons rules and why Dungeons & Dragons rules are just so much better than all the D&D all the D&D copy games out there. Let's get into it. It is classic. You cannot get more classic than Dungeons & Dragons. It is the most classic. Goes back to 1974. Goes back to Gary Gygax. Goes back to D20s and disco balls, baby. It is as classic as it gets, right? So when you sit down to Dungeons & Dragons, unlike any other tabletop role-playing game on the earth, right, you have more history, more Americana, more weight, right, more substance than anything out there. The rules are quite literally classic, and they resonate with an energy of classicness, right? D&D is the progenitor, and its rules are the progenitor. And 5th edition has inherited lessons from every single edition, and quite frankly, no other game on the planet can give lessons to itself the way Dungeons & Dragons can, because they literally don't have the years, right? So next is accessible. It is very accessible. Well, actually, it is accessible, in meaning that 5th edition, the 4th edition rules were quite inaccessible. They were overly complicated, arbitrarily complicated. They made the game kind of try to run like a video game. 5th edition swept all that noise off the board, returned the game to the best things from 1st edition, the best things from 2nd edition, the best things from 3rd edition, and absolutely darn near nothing from 4th edition, right? Actually, there's a few things in there, but for the sake of the narrative, not really much. And basically very accessible in that it can be played by anyone who can read well, and has a tolerance for a significant amount of complexity, right? And it is just much more accessible than most tabletop role-playing games. And boy, is this real. Like Pathfinder, massively complicated, and Pathfinder 2 made it only even more complicated, which was the real problem. The third one that Professor Dungeon Master talked about is simple. I actually think you can boil down the 5e rules very, very succinctly. I recently saw it done in one very specific game, which was Animal Adventures. Animal Adventures presents the 5e rules in literally, I think, 5 pages, right? It's pretty amazing. I was amazed how, so it can be simple, and compared to other games, it's simple. I was just reading Cortex's rules. First you build, a difficulty check in Dungeons & Dragons. Take a D20, roll that D20. If you have a skill in that thing, add your proficiency. Also, add your attribute for whatever the skill goes off of. Did you beat the difficulty that the game master set? you succeeded. I was reading Cortex, right? They're like, build your own pool between 1 and 8 dice. Roll that pool. Take the 2 highest, and then use one of your effect dies. Right? Now build your opposition pool. The DM builds the opposition pool, and they roll the opposition pool. Did your 2 chosen dice beat the opposition dice? And what's going to happen with the effect die? I don't know. Like, far more complicated, right? Like in getting into, 2 sets of dice and like dice pools, and much more complicated. And there are a lot of games like this. Shadowrun, one of my most favorite games of all times, is famous for having one of the best worlds in all of gaming, and one of the absolute worst rule sets, right? Last is Approachable, right? Basically, the Dungeon Master said that the game is approachable. It can be. The Essentials kit, right? Here's $25, you're in. Everything you need to play, right? It's approachable. It's the entire game in a box, right? And literally less than 100 pages to read. You can get rolling. It can be approachable, right? So I completely agree with Dungeon Master with Professor Dungeon Master on this. Dungeons & Dragons rules really set it apart from the pack and make it so that it is almost impossible to defeat in the market, or in quality, or in lovability, right? Like, Dungeons & Dragons 5e rules are classic, accessible, simple, and approachable, right? And that's they can be crafted that way. If you try to dump into the deep end, all of this changes, right? But if you just approach the game from just the Essentials kit, which, all of this is true. I think if you don't use the Essentials kit, a lot of these start breaking up, right? It's not nearly as simple. But I really agree with Professor Dungeon Master. Dungeons & Dragons is a spectacular, special, wonderful, unique game, and all of this is important to acknowledge. And I'm just super happy to see somebody coming along and saying, hey, 5e ain't just some other game. It's not the best in the world because it has the biggest name. It's the best because it's the freaking best, right? And Professor Dungeon Master's a really smart dude, and it's just really nice to see him talking about this openly. All that's my opinion. What are your thoughts? Do you agree that Dungeons & Dragons rules are classic, accessible, simple, and approachable? Love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.